So, sure, I've spoken a number of times about these damn awful things called glide bombs. So you take a bomb, you add some fins at the back, some intelligence, you let it go from behind your own lines in your own territory, out of harm's way. It travels quite a long way. How long?
Well, it depends how high you land and how fast you are, but up to 50 kilometres
50
away.
kilometres. That's quite a long way.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not, intensely accurate, but it lands on the battlefields of your opponents and does a lot of damage. Linked to that, because one way of getting rid of those is to put a plane up and challenge the other plane that's launching it, is I gather we've got more news coming in on the F-16s.
So you're absolutely right. The interesting thing about the news in the F-16s, going straight to the point, is that there's a lot of media coverage that says F-16s are about to arrive in Ukraine. And the way that conversation is posed sounds like that's the answer to the Maiden's Prayer, that they'll arrive and suddenly Russia will be on the back foot. And you go, right, let's unpick that a bit. Why would you announce they were coming in? I mean, eventually you're going to see them over the battlefield. But, Russia has been pounding away at Ukraine airfields these last few weeks. They've claimed they've destroyed 5, I think, of the Su-27s on the ground just in July alone. Whether that's true or not, whether it's part of this ghost army or whatever, we don't know. But what President Zelensky has said is that one of the biggest threats that his forces face at the moment is these glide bombs. And you go, hey, why is that? And part of that is because Russia can launch them from the safety of Russian airspace.
And a lot of them.
And they're pretty accurate as well. And some of them have been pretty big, so they cause carnage on the ground. You don't see them coming, you can't stop them. So the way to stop them is to shoot the aircraft down, or at least threaten it, so that it goes, it can't, because to do 40 kilometres, it's got to be very high and fairly fast, which is pretty vulnerable. As a military guy,
you're exposed.
But they obviously think they'll be safe up there. So by bringing the F-16s in, I think part of one of their principal challenges will be to try to address this threat. So the really interesting question is, how? Because these Russian aircraft are inside Russian airspace. So they're well protected. They're all sorts of surface-to-air missiles and air defense systems, because Russia will have all of those at its border anyway. So how are the F-16 is going to do it? Now, one of the ways they do it is using what's called an AMRAAM missile, Advanced Medium Range Air-to-Air Missile. The 120, I think it's called, is most widely used, but it depends which model they get. The earlier models could go about 30 miles. The later models can go up to 100 miles.
It's an air-to-air missile.
Air-to-air missile. And they're pretty deadly because, without getting into the geekery here, originally, if I was shooting you, I would have to have my radar illuminating your aircraft, and then a missile would go, okay, I've got that signal, and then it would start to transmit a signal, so it would take over identifying you, and then it would home in on the radar return. Of course, inevitably, you would develop different tactics. So you could actually put chaff out, or you could have electronic means to deceive the radar. And the subsequent generations of missiles have basically got smarter and smarter about how to stop being deceived and also go further and further. So part of this will America let Ukraine have long-range versions of this missile?
And who's going to pilot the planes?
Well, that's the great question, because at the moment Ukraine has a number of pilots, but they're of course trained in the old Soviet-style aircraft, and you might be up, down, left, right, faster, slower will probably be much the same in any aeroplane, but all of these, the technology that's in there will be completely different. They've been doing some training, but bluntly, so Ukraine needs quantity of aircraft. They've asked for, I think it's 130 F-16s.
Really?
Well, that's 4 squadrons plus a few spares. They think that's how many they need to put a credible threat against Russia. I think they've been offered up to 85 so far. So they're probably going to get the aircraft, and then there's the spares and the logistics support and the engineers to train, whatever. But they don't have the pilots. And although they've been training some of them, they're going to be drip feeding in. There's been reports that they might have a squadron's worth of pilots trained by the end of this year. One of the advantages is that, generally speaking, these aircraft will be operating over Ukrainian territory. So as you remember in sort of Battle of Britain, we were really short of pilots. We had lots of aircraft. And if our aircraft was shot down, the pilots bailed out. They landed on British territory.
Next day they're up again.
Dusted down, given a pint, sent back to their squadron, get back in, off you go again. So the Ukrainians, if they have plenty of aircraft and they use the ejection seat and they're not blown up as the aircraft shot down, it might be that they're able to be a bit more resilient because obviously the Russian pilots are going to be over enemy territory.
I think Bagwell actually told us what the conversion training was like in terms of time, didn't he?
He did, and the trouble is, if you've got a guy who is very experienced on a former Russian fighter jet, so he knows how radars work, he knows the principle, he's got the awareness of how you fight three-dimensional chess, how you use this information, how you lead people around. If you've got all that, they reckon it was sort of 3 to 6 months to be able to become competent and capable on an F-16. My experience of the front line is you don't have many of those people who have all that experience. They tend to be the tip of the sword, but you've got loads of people who have, yes, they're combat ready on a fast jet, but that, we've said before, is a bit like a 17-year-old just passed his test. Yes, he's allowed out onto the roads, but he's a danger to shipping.
Yeah.
So part of the issue is not just about being competent at flying, it's about being competent enough to go to war and also be able to operate as a package of aircraft. Because there's some really clever tricks that you can do in the air. So, for example, I don't know if they're going to have data link. Why is that important? If I'm in my F-16 and you're in your Russian jet and I identify you, you know how far I am away. You know how long range missile I've got. So if you know I'm over 100 miles away, you don't do much about it. If I've got a data link that now data links your position to one of my F-16 colleagues who's not 100 miles away, but is 50 miles away, but over there, he's now got the information of where you are and he can launch a missile at you without you knowing that he's there.
Because he hasn't had to use his own...
his own radar. So there's all sorts of really clever techniques that can be used. And this is just Janet and John's stuff. There's a lot more techniques available. But they take time to learn. They take time to, hours and hours in a simulator, hours and hours of working out, because nothing ever quite goes according to plan when you're actually up there. So in short, will the F-16s arrive shortly? Maybe. Will they arrive in sufficient numbers to make a big difference? No. Will they cause the Russian pilots to think twice? Because there will be F-16 radars lighting up the Russian fighters. Will that cause them to go, oh, and catch their breath a bit? Maybe. Can't do it twice. but it may well, therefore, deter some of the actions.
So it is a significant development. It's going to take some time for it to build up into the sort of military capability that Ukraine would ideally want. And also, it's going to have to start from scratch with people. Now, how long was your training?
Well, about 3.5 years from scratch to... And that, again, I reiterate, that's just to be combat ready on a squadron.
Yeah.
That's the 17-year-old who's just passed his test.
Yeah.
It's really another 3 years on top of that before you are a master of your domain. So it's 6 years.
5 to 6 years.
It's a long time. But no, it's an interesting development. But and I think... But the other thing we're going to probably cover at some stage is when, not if, the first of them are shot down or destroyed on the ground. Because these are 50 million pounds worth of aircraft. And they will be targeted by the Russians. They will be using satellites, long-range missiles, sensors, spies, whatever they can to target these missiles, to target these aircraft.